All right, welcome back. You're still watching Daybreak on this 26th day of June 2023. We're just a few days to half of the year. And of course, today marks about 9 months, 14 days of the presidency of William Ruto. And soon to start his first financial year, full financial year, with his own budget, or his budget, and of course the finance bill, which will be an act in the coming days. In studio, I have Fred Okango, who is Political Affairs Secretary at KANU. Good morning.
Good morning, Sam.
Welcome back. You'll be telling us what's the latest in your party and the coalition. You also have Geoffrey Wandeto, Member of Parliament for Tetu constituency. Good morning.
Good morning, Sam, and nice to be back here.
Great, it's good to see you. And I hear you're doing some...
Don't go there.
I won't go there. Then I have Bernard Kitur, the Member of Parliament for Nandi Hills. Good morning.
Good morning, and
great to see you.
Great to be here.
We've not met.
Yes.
Have you been here before?
Well, I've been here in the other stations, but I'm glad to be here this morning for
okay.
the show.
Okay, karibu sana. So again, it's your maiden appearance.
Yes.
We'll give you an opportunity to make your maiden speech. And of course, you're expecting Beatrice Alachi, Member of Parliament for Dagoretti North. She's in the building. She'll be joining us shortly to take us through what is expected of the coming days. And if you look at the quick stories on the front pages of the Standard and the Daily Nation. On the Standard, it's schools defy ministry. The numerous orders from Ministry of Education leadership being ignored by heads of schools for what they term as impractical policy directions and lack of adequate funding from the government. Experts say the ministry appears powerless as only Teacher Service Commission holds sway. You see the story continued on page 4 and 5. And they're talking about parents and stakeholders blame flouting of fee guidelines on failure by state to disburse capitation to schools on time. Some learners report as early as 5:30 a.m., even as CS ordered schools to operate within 6-hour window. And of course, sometimes it is explained, especially in the urban areas, that the early arrivals in schools is informed by the traffic situations that can befall the urban centers. Then state appears toothless as schools ignore rules. The latest rule break is sending learners on midterm a week earlier than planned. However, some principals say the early break was occasioned by a shortage of funds. Imagine that at the time that the country just went through the budget estimates to the tune of 630 billion shillings for the education sector, but those challenges with us. On the front page of the Daily Nation, the main story is return of terror, having indicated some of the areas where terror has been experienced. That is Mandera, Wajir, Garissa, and Lamu County. And you'll see some graphic illustration of that. Then CS Nakhumicha vows to take on cartels as she seeks to clean up NHIF and KEMSA, and so much more that is inside the paper. I want us to have a mention about this very important issue of education as featured by the Standard. Schools defy ministry guidelines on fees. And this is informed by also recent disbursements of resources to the schools to the tune of about 25% of what the schools should receive. As of the month of June this year, the schools had received up to 45% of resources that should go to them, knowing that currently the arrangement is that the first term they should receive capitation from government to the tune of 50%, 30% in the second term, and 20% in the final term, which is the third term. And therefore, by the second term, they should have received a maximum of 80%, but so far they've only received 45%. And the head teachers are claiming that it is because of the shortages that they are also having to send learners home. Let's begin there, Honorable Geoffrey Wandeto from Tetu, and talk to us about what you've witnessed in your schools, because this has been the year of many firsts. The junior secondary schools starting, the confusion about what should happen to deployment of teachers, where the learners should start their learning, and of course the shortage of even the capitation for junior secondary schools. Yeah. But what have you seen in Tetu, and do you have a way of getting out of this? Because if learners lose their time because there are no resources, then that is time they may not recover as they should.
Yeah, I think, Sam, you're right. That obviously there has been quite a number of challenges this year as far as disbursement of funds is concerned, a lot of them being delays, and it's not just in education. I think we've seen this in counties, we've seen this even salaries getting delayed, and I think it's because of the economic sort of situation that that we are coming from. But I'm happy to, if you look at the month of June, things now look like they are normalizing, yeah? I think the counties now have received their funds. Most of the schools have received their capitation. We are no longer talking about delays in salaries. So when it comes to the capitation funds, in my own constituency, I've not seen, of course, any significant crisis, except the fact that, when these funds are delayed, then you have the pressure on schools just trying to maintain students. Most of the schools, what they do, they actually rely on credit. Yeah. So, and every time you have to then rely on credit for food, for fuel, for all these other expenses, it then means that you basically then have to rely on more expensive suppliers, because in this country we know the more you don't pay people in good time, the more they charge slightly higher for their goods and services. But now we are happy that the situation seems to be normalizing. But I think it's a wake-up call to the ministry, to the actors within the education sector, to ensure that funding for education, which is very, very important, basically receives prioritization in terms of disbursement, because we know the importance of education in terms of being able to prepare the next generation of the population, in terms of work. So this is something that I think we need to address. 626 million has been set aside in this year's budget for education, and the challenges we are seeing in secondary schools, some are even worse when you go to universities, where you're talking about universities which have not paid salaries for very many years, university education being underfunded, and so on and so forth. So it is something that we need to address. And I think it is time that we start addressing the whole thing of how do we want to finance education in this country. What should the parent do? What should the government do? What should, what is a more sustainable, realistic model of funding education in this country? I think it is something that we need to...
And what do you think that would be, especially in a situation where you have the school fees is still capped at 53,000 shillings especially for boarding schools, and that is regardless of whether it's a national school, extra county, whatever level it is, which has been in operation for a couple of years now. What do you think, at a time that also several parents are not able to even pay for it?
One of the things we need to do is to standardize costs. If you check from school to school, there is a huge difference in terms of, let's say, the cost of feeding, the cost of uniforms. I think the more we start standardizing, the various inputs that go into Alana. For example, what sort of uniform should Alana carry to school? What sort of, diet should we be giving our Alanas? How do we then ensure that this is almost replicated from one school to another? Because today the challenge we have, and this is why parents are complained, is that you find one school, based on what it is doing, it is able to, it requires significantly much more money than what has been allocated to government. And also, we as parents also need to remove the pressure from schools, in terms of what they want them to do for our children, in terms of what they want, we want them to give our learners. I think the more we come up with some standardized models of doing this, the better. Some, I'm aware of a case whereby, schools heads have sat and even agreed on a common diet for day secondary schools. And in that place, and it's something we are also trying to try in our constituency, we are then able to agree this should be the standard fee, and it should not vary from one day secondary school to another. And they go into very, very detailed calculation in terms of what children should eat, what diet should be, what sort of inputs they should go, how much they should be able to buy those items for. And then this ensures that we are able to then standardize fees very, very easily across.
Okay. All right. And joining us again is Beatrice Elachi, the Member of Parliament for Dagoretti North. Good morning.
Morning, sir.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
We are talking about the situation in schools. And Honorable Kitur, what is the situation in your constituency, because I've been speaking to a few principals and they tell you of the challenges, some of those that Honorable Wandeto here is talking about, that because the government capitation has been long way coming or delayed, then there are certain operations that have to wait.
Yes. Just as my colleague has just mentioned, there have been challenges indeed. Even in my own constituency, I've had an opportunity to engage all the head teachers, time and again, as we discuss, how the training of students, the teaching in schools. There have been challenges in terms of capitation. That's for a fact. Even though the schools use credit to be able to get most of these goods, like the food and such, they tender it out. There have been challenges with payments of the same. Also coupled with the pricing, there have been, diverse or huge disparity in the pricing of goods that are supplied to schools. Like, for instance, sugar. Whatever they had budgeted before, there have been a huge increase. Like even take flour, for instance. We all know that the pricing maybe in the shops have also increased incredibly. And then also the fact that this capitation has not been coming on time. When you even look at the concerns that these teachers now, when they are meeting in Mombasa to have this conversation, the capitation seemingly has changed. It used to be 50%, and then 20 and 30, and then 20%. But then, as it were, there is this proposal that is supposed to be around 25%, across. So I think there was a presidential working party that had been selected, and I had an opportunity to engage with one of the commissioners who are looking wholesomely at the whole of the education sector, because the human resource training is very critical for the future. Even in my own constituency, I find it very disappointing when you find sometimes you go to a school and children probably, because parents also still have a challenge economically to be able to raise school fees, there should be a way we are able to mitigate that so that students can still be able to be in school to learn, so that there is equitably across the country, the training is fair all across. So my thoughts about this is there is going to be some bit of change, realizing we just passed the other day the finance bill, and we gave a huge allocation, about almost 27% of the budget going to education, and particularly the key areas that had serious challenges, like even when you talk about even JSS, the increment that has been placed there from 15 billion to 25 billion, those kinds of things. And we expect right now that with the expanded tax base that we've now been able to have, we will be able to have funds now being distributed to these schools. So I like the engagement that's going
Honorable Kituro, the problem is not the allocation in the budget. That one is there. It is the release of funds. I mean, how does that change?
I suppose now, this is the first of Kenya Kwanza, and I think it's also a concern. You remember the first time the president got in here, the issue of the presidential working party that was instituted immediately, because I had an engagement with, as I said, with the commissioner, one of which were how are we going to streamline completely the aspects around education sector. And part of this is some of these revenues being, money being disbursed. I want to tell you some. If you look at a few months ago, when you look at the counties, for instance, almost the government has been able, in its collection manner, been able to look at that, most of these sectors, and disperse funds right across there. Maybe the seriousness of the management of the fiscal policy and behavior is now changing. We, all of us right now, are keen to look at how this is going to go forward. However, as well, we have been contributing a lot through the CDF funding, which we've also given some bit of increased allocation, because one of the key celebrations that happened in our constituencies when we were able to give out the bursaries that we did, it had a great impact in most of these schools, leveraging on the capitation that was coming in less. That is now what is within our purview to be able to control, probably as members of parliament. But I think from the government perspective, we are also very keen, and we're following that, being now in Kenya Kwanza government, to make sure that this allocation happens. So I think it's the seriousness of the fiscal management. Okay.
Fiscal management, you call it. Honorable Elachi, because you come from Dagoretti North, you have a couple of schools that depend on the government for financing, but also obviously the learners' population is bigger than what the schools can accommodate. What are your thoughts about these challenges that schools have continued to experience with the slow takeoff of the junior secondary school and bringing a lot of uncertainty there. What are the solutions that we should be looking forward to?
Thank you, Sam. And first of all, good morning, Kenyans. Let me say this. I mean, if there's a pillar that we, in Parliament, we are we are trying to push, I know it's the pillar of education. But then now, when you come to the reality in terms of how things are and how things are moving, the one thing we need to ask ourselves as a country is, first of all, so that we get to look at how do you manage the school fees issue. It's the issue of bursaries, Sam. So you find we have all of us bursaries. And we are giving all these children these bursaries. And then the government comes in with its capitation. So the question will be, have we sat down as a country and put down our data, which we can because each child now has an NEMIS number, and then from there now you would know how to move in with all these bursaries. And it's not just from politicians, it's from well-wishers. You have Equity, you have Jomo Kenyatta Foundation, you have governors, everyone. And if you put it together, I believe we can now stop mismanaging and come to the right way to ensure that you can find yourselves handling 80% of this school fees, and 20% now goes to the parent. And especially when we talk of day schools, I think for now day schools, when you look at what Mheshimiwa gives in and what the government gives in, you know a parent can even pay 2,000 shillings. But it is how we manage and how the teachers, the ministry, and all the sponsors must sit on one table and realize you need one portal. That when you have done your school fees, that when you have now identify the kids who really are in need of this school fees, and if possible, a day school, you can identify the whole school, all your schools, and put them and streamline them, all of it. And so you'll ask yourself, what kitty is, how much is coming from the governor's side, how much is coming from the Mheshimiwa side, the MCA side, and these other sides of other well-wishers. And you put it together and you ask yourself, how much is government giving? And so when you streamline that, you will find, first of all, we have come to a level where you now manage properly. I'll give an example. Now, the challenge in Nairobi, Sam, you know, we have schools that are community schools because we have very few schools in Nairobi. We have 204 schools across Nairobi. That is one, with a very, very high coming in of students or pupils. So you have one school, for example, that has 5,000 kids. Another one has 4. Let me give you examples of Dagoretti North. So you have Kawangware with the highest 4,000. Then you have Katina, 3,000 and something. Then you have Muslim. Then you come into Kilimani, Milimani. So in total, you'll find yourself with quite a huge number of pupils, but you don't have classes. So we are forced to go up. But then these were schools that were built during the colonial time. So you find most of them were the city council schools. You must bring back the guys of public works to look whether it is possible. If it is not, it means you have to bring down the whole school so that you are able now to build a better school. Yes, I appreciate that the government is about to build, and I'm hoping it will be true, to build 3,500 classrooms. And the president said when we were in Raisambo. And so I am hoping that we will spread now and see how does this 3,500. But you see, it is not just the infrastructure. So now let's go to learning itself. Because one of the things that I have realized, we have come to a time, it's not like our days, where you went to school and you felt you're going to school because this is your path and it takes you to your destiny, your career. Today, and I want to tell also parents, Sam, because I'm seeing it as a very dangerous trend. Parents would just wish a child to finish Form 4. It does not matter the grades, it does not matter what. So the ministry has to come in now to ensure that this, but I know it's within this 844 system. I am hoping within the CBC system, we can change the whole model of how kids look at learning and just let them learn what they feel it's best for them. Because right now, it's like we're just pushing them. And then when they finish, so you come and now you start looking for even police. You find you have very few, with very few grades. And yet you're looking for a D stand, a D plane. It's not very kind for the country. And it's something we have to look at. But then for me, in terms of the ministry, I think the ministry must now reawaken itself, because you find so many conflicts of teachers in between. We've made it so political. And I think that is one thing we must relook at. That when you look at how now people run schools, even just people appreciating that I have been on a board for 2 terms or 1 term, it is my time to leave, it becomes a very interesting conflict. And so you find the schools are just, when new teachers come in or new head teachers come in, they are finding it very rough, because people have entrenched and they feel this is my right. So I want to also tell parents and the Ministry of Education, indeed, if a parent does not have a child in a school, then you have no interest of that school. You see, when you have your child there, number one, you'll have interest of learning. You'll not just look at the constructions of buildings, but you'll look at the learning, the academics. How are we performing? How are we moving? But if you don't have, then your interest will be more. Can we build the school? Can we move the school? But lastly, we must think of how we deal with these community schools. And we must have requirements also, because you can't tell me a school has 70 kids. Honestly, that is not fair to that child. And you know, Article 53 is very clear that while we were passing this constitution, Sam, we said that the right of a child is, number one, to a name and nationality from birth, to free and compulsory basic education, to basic nutrition, shelter, and health care. I think the one we have done was, I won't say about the compulsory of basic education, but I think basic nutrition we are doing badly, very badly. That if we are not careful, these children will have a challenge in their productive life. Because we find children, especially in Nairobi, all over the streets because of hunger. And we need a way of just working with the administration, the interior, the teachers, the parents, and for us, leaders, to see how do we resolve that.
Okay, you raised quite some pertinent issues, especially on the welfare of the children. And I was just looking at the results of the recent national exam, that is for KCSE, and you realize that 55% of the class of 2022 scored D+ and below, 40% were below D+. And it's worrying, because if that has to determine the pathways they have to pursue, obviously now we hear of CBC and how the pathways may change. I don't know what your thoughts are, Fred, at a time that schools are having to deal with all that. Yes, delayed release of capitation, but also the quality of grades is low, the motivation of teachers is low. Many, especially those that have means, are running away from public institutions, yet taxpayers are paying a lot of money, 630 billion shillings to go into that.
That's true. Even going by the current allocation in the budget, it's very true. The amount of money that the government plans for education is quite substantive, but the outcome, or rather the product of that process, could be worrying. And maybe just before I answer that, if you look at what is happening today, majority of the parents in the basic education are still supporting their children in public schools, while the government says that this should be a free primary education. Now, most of these schools, you realize that they are underfunded in terms of resources, both human resource and money. And then also the facilities are not the facilities that probably we would be very proud about. I'm sure some you're aware, because you're a journalist, you know, you have covered this so many times. Every time we go into an election is when you come closer to the real facilities in our schools. Some are very, very bad and not worth even mentioning. And some schools, our children are still learning under the tree. Now, if you look at all these things, well, successive governments have had budgets and planning. Why is it that we have not had a standard and molded education facility in our schools so that our children can enjoy this? Remember, education is a right, and every person has a right to that education. And we say every time that education is an equalizer. If a child in Baringo, in Homa Bay, Kabondo Kasipul, where I come from, cannot enjoy the same facility with a child in Kileleshwa Primary or Nairobi Primary or Olympic Primary, then education is no longer an equalizer. And therefore, we must talk about it. Now, in terms of these grades that you're talking about, in my view, we must now start addressing the teacher-student ratio. In some schools, there are very few teachers. And if they're there, the ones from TSC are very few, and now the school must now employ, the BOM must now employ others. That gets to an extra cost because the parents must now, the PTA, they pay money to now pay, the parents pay money to now pay the BOM teachers. It also goes without saying that in terms of improving the facility in the schools, the parents, the BOM sits down and agree on what extra the parent pays, while in some instances, the government has set the regulations on what should be paid by the government and what should be paid by the parents. So it's an extra. And that's why you see the schools now defy ministry guidelines as the media reports today. It is a very worrying situation. It translates some into the grades of the children. Because if the teachers are few, the resources allocated are less, the funding is minimal, the facilities are not commensurate, then for sure the outcome will be an outcome that is not desirable. And what we would want to say is that, in fact, this regime, Kenya Kwanza, we have had issues from the word go. They might not be very bad issues, they're challenges. But you listen, when Machogu came into office, this CS had some agenda of transforming the education sector. He banned school preps, remember? There was outrage when he banned the school preps. Then there was the issue of exams, KCSE leakage that he had to deal with. Then all these now, they had to defend themselves as a ministry. But what did the parents do? The parents said, no, that is not the issue. My students, the principal speaking now, our students passed and there was no leakage. The parents themselves say, no, no, no. Because we don't get capitation and because we get very little, if any, our students must continue learning for preps so that we cover the syllabus. Okay. Why? Because the teacher-student ratio. In some schools, they have to struggle to cover the syllabus. There are few teachers, so some teachers do extra work. That is why the most important thing that, in my view, should be addressed first is the human resource. Where do we get the money to employ more teachers so that we say, now we have teachers? Then let's go into the facilities and say, do we have enough facilities that can accommodate this 100% transition? Then let's go now into the issues of standardizing, that the education that we get in Nairobi should be the same education that we get in Homa Bay County, Kabondo Kasipul. That way, we will say that education is for sure unequal. But as it is today, there are still teachers who are saying, no, for us, we are not living in the same country. West Pokot, Turkana, I've been there, Lodwar. If you look at the standard of education, it is worrying because schools, facilities, teachers, they're not there. So for me, I would say that the stakeholders in education must come together. Okay. Teachers, parents, the ministry officials, they must come together. Even the media is part of this. They must come together and highlight some of these issues that are affecting education so that we address them pronto. Otherwise, every year we'll continue complaining about ministry giving directives, teachers defying, parents paying more, government saying there's no money. all these issues, we must talk about them.
I want us to take a short break, but just a quick question. There was word that constituencies would be requested members of parliament would be requested to use the constituency CDF kitties to come up with school facilities for JSS, laboratories, libraries. Has that happened in your constituency?
Well, it hasn't, because also there were delays in the release of the CDF kitty. So most of the money that came, of course, initially went to bursaries, but now almost of the CDF kitty has now come. So that work will now start. But obviously, CDF has traditionally been used to improve school facilities. So this, for a lot of members of parliament, this is not new. It is something they are progressively doing in their constituencies. However, you remember there was a lot of investment by government in JSS in high schools, yeah? So again, maybe it's something that we would request government to also come in. If the decision has now been made that JSS will be domiciled in our primary schools, I think we need to see the same sort of investment by government also coming to support the CDF kitty, because there's a lot of competition.
Those are just classrooms. There was no laboratory that was built in the secondary schools anyway. Yeah,
because the assumption here was that the lab will be shared.
Okay.
That exists. Now, if it is in primary school and that decision has been made, and that's why we're waiting also for the report of the task force, yeah? Because that is what is going to settle all these issues once and for all.
I hear you. Honorable Elachi, any interventions to coming up with laboratories for the junior secondary schools at the primary level?
Yes. In fact, we are trying to work with Google, Intel in some of the schools, and I'm happy they've started with Nairobi Primary. We started with FAST for the last 2 years, training the teachers. We've finished. On Friday, we launched a virtual lab, which is a lab that can help them through the tablets that were given by government, the last administration. So they looked at those tablets, and now they've put in some of the subjects. I'm also, because in Nairobi, you might find we talk about teachers, we talk about classes, we talk about so many things. So I'm also trying to see how can we get smart TVs? We just put in one class.
Those sound like they're ICT labs.
They're ICT labs, but you can use them to do science, by the way.
Okay.
Yes. They're very interesting, and I think it will even make children to appreciate science subjects.
Okay.
But then in terms of the labs, yes, I know we have like 3 we are going to build, and let's see how it goes.
Okay.
Yes.
For you, Honorable Kituru, any progress in Nandi Hills?
I think we had the conversation of when JSS was reverted back somewhat to primary schools. So what we had agreed is most of the secondary schools that were carved out from primary schools, most of them were in similar compounds. So we were, in our budgeting process, we had said most of the funds we are going to put into these institutions where you can build labs that can be used by both primary and secondary. But one of the excitement that I have is in Kenya Kwanza government, for instance, because the issue was staffing. There was a serious...
No, you haven't answered my question.
That's what
I'm very specific on laboratories.
Yes, that's exactly where I'm going.
Have you been able to use the CDF kitty to put up laboratories, science labs?
In our programs, we were to build those labs, but then we had a challenge with the delayed capital funding from CDF.
The answer is no?
Not yet.
Okay, all right. I want us to take a short break here. On the break, when I come back, we'll be getting to matters politics, especially with what the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Coalition is saying of how they are going to protest against the passing of Finance Bill 2023, why that, and what options are there. After the break, stay tuned.